or more Twitter threads or Twitter that you've done. And bro, I'm not joking. I feel like this could be so many conversations. Like you are such a purist in the sense that you have an idea and you have to express it and you have to give it enough detail first in Twitter and then on your blog. And I feel very few people are like you in that way. Do you find that to be the case?
I mean, I'm just naturally curious. I don't stop at... I mean, I feel a lot of people just stop when they feel confused or they have a black hole or like a hole in their understanding. And I have to just keep digging until that hole is filled.
But that's the curiosity part. You also write all of this out later on.
So for writing for me is understanding stuff.
You use
so
writing.
If I don't write it, I feel I'm just fooling myself into thinking I understand something. So for me, writing is the final proof that yes, I get
understood it.
Yes.
And how'd you bump across this idea that you must write it to feel like you've understood it?
I just naturally write a lot. I wrote my first blog post in 2005. I just enjoy the process of putting together words in coherent sentences and making them link logically. I think otherwise thinking for me is writing. So it's not like something I see as an artifact or something I need to do later. It's just one and the same thing. I write, I think, I write. So even in the car, I was constantly writing because otherwise thoughts are just this big cloud in the head, which are not neatly shaped. And you feel you get something, but you don't. So when I put things into the word, that's when everything starts getting connected into like a logical whole.
What we write? Yeah, I understand that feeling because पहले ऐसा लगता है कि gaseous matter float कर रहा है and then you start writing it and it acquires a silhouette, an outline of it.
Especially when you go non-linearly, you add a thought, then you modify it, and then you see first thought was probably flawed. You make a system, you diagram. So that's why also I love writing notes first on like a physical notebook. And so it's a long, like an idea to a blog post is a long process in that sense. You're working, you get a thought, and then you have to get back in a notebook, write your thoughts, and then you see what patterns emerge. Then you put them on a blog post, and then you edit it, then you tweet it out. So it's really, but I enjoy that process. It's sort of like just
therapeutic.
It's sort of like just dancing with an idea for a long period of time. If it's a beautiful idea, why would you let it go?
Yeah. Very interesting. But I want to get deeper into that. But before that, could you take 5 minutes and introduce yourself to people who are going to find out about you for the first time or who know about you but don't know enough about you?
Sure. Yeah. So hi, I'm Paras Chopra. I am curious about everything and anything.
Right.
That's my Twitter bio says stay curious. But I have been an entrepreneur also. So I've been starting companies ever since I realized you could build companies by writing code. So I've been in love with tech ever since my teenage years. I was writing neural networks in Visual Basic 6.0.
Wow.
Yeah, 25 years back.
No way.
That's how
in
long back.
V-Basic?
Yeah.
W40, L30?
Yes, yeah, so it was fascinating. But then I was also reading these articles by Paul Graham and Jessica Livingston where they talked about how Google and Yahoo guys were building companies using code. So that's when my mental model shifted that you didn't need to build big factories with chimneys to build a company. You could write code and build a company. And during my 4 years of engineering, that's what I was doing constantly. So I did 3 startups in my engineering days.
Where were you studying to be an engineer?
Delhi College of Engineering.
Also in Delhi itself?
Yes.
And you did 3 startups in 4 years?
Yeah.
Did you sell any of them?
No.
You closed all of them?
Yeah.
But they're fine attempts because they sharpen your instinct later on.
So eventually that led to my 4th startup, Wingify, because I realized I was building stuff without knowing how to get users for it. And
He's gone,
eventually I built marketing software. And that also did not work out. And my 5th attempt was Visual Website Optimizer, which was an A/B testing platform. And that picked up having a great product market fit in 2010. So 2010 to now, the company grew from $0 to $50 million in revenue and completely bootstrapped. So we never raised any funding. And recently in January, I sold it to private equity.
Are you at liberty to disclose how much you sold it for?
It's
how many zeros? Start with that.
Yeah. I mean, this is something I'm not super comfortable with throwing money around.
Sure.
I think for me, it's more about the adventure of it.
Do you mean that?
But I'm financially free.
Yeah. For the rest of your life.
For the rest of my life, essentially.
Wow. And
I mean, people like to grab onto the numbers. But I feel what's more interesting is the 15 years that I put into it.
No.
And the things I learned. And of course, I think being financially free is great, but I could be financially free at 1/10 the number of it. Or if I had 10 times more the money, I would still be
Financially
thinking
free.
and behaving the same way. So in that sense, it's not super material.
No, I get it. It's a bait. Like, you know, this IIT Baba character that blew up on the internet recently. The word IIT is the bait. And his Baba-ness has nothing to do with his IIT. But now the Baba-ness is explored because IIT is in the picture, right?
Yeah.
The sort of zeros that we talk about.
Yeah. But it also ends up probably optimizing for the wrong thing that I may not want to.
Pass on as a message. That people will be optimizing for a certain amount of money as opposed to...
Or maybe I'll be known for trying to optimize for a financial outcome while I see myself as someone who's just curious and explores things. And whatever comes out of it is a nice side bonus. But the primary motivation has been, let's just dig into things and see what comes out of it.
Very interesting.
I mean, if I were trying to sort of optimize this metric, I would have long raised venture capital or maybe had taken the company public. There's so many other ways that you could have optimized just the valuation number.
Right.
And that's something I was never doing that.
It's a very interesting fact because I almost never hear of bootstrapped startups going that hard in terms of scaling so well, right? Like there's eventually need for some degree of venture capital. Either it's a scaling problem. I'm assuming it's always a scaling problem, like why you need capital. What is so unique about your work that you never needed venture capital? Like is there a different time that you started it and it was easier to do it without VC or what?
I think nobody told us that. I mean, nobody gave us a playbook, which is so common of literally you can't think of startup without thinking about pre-seed funding, seed funding, series A, B, C, D. So it's almost like going to a school and going through first, second, third, fourth standard. Back in 2010, that playbook wasn't really evolved. So I didn't even know what series A, B, C, D was. So for me, I grew up in an environment where businesses are always about making more money than you're spending.
Sure, yeah.
That's the business 101 of what everyone talks about.
Right.
And that's what we ended up doing essentially.
And does that, because I'm trying to understand, right? The instinct, I'm Gupta. हमारा instinct कह रहा है कि भाई अगर आपका profit नहीं बन रहा तो business चल कैसे रहा है?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there is almost all the big startups you ever hear about spend years spending for customer acquisition, for some or the other thing that makes their expenses a lot more than their revenues, right? And so they're loss-making startups, but their valuations keep bloating. And the founders keep kind of getting rich because they're able to do secondaries or have like good stake. Is it fair to say that that business model is flawed? Or is it only how do I see it?
No, I don't think it's flawed. I just think bootstrapping as a path to building companies is not given enough attention. I think certain businesses definitely require a lot of capital. If you're building a hardware business, you're building widgets in a factory where you have to invest upfront, then you obviously have to raise a lot of capital. But software is beautiful in the sense that you write code and it can scale infinitely.
Sure.
You can make infinite copies of software at almost zero cost. So if your cost base is so low of manufacturing and delivering value, then it is possible to bootstrap businesses. And like Wingify has been an example of it, $0 to $50 million. And each year our revenue has grown. Each year we've been profitable. There are other examples, not just Wingify.
Sure.
Zoho is an example. And many others out there. So VC business makes sense when you have to invest significantly upfront, but software, I'm literally my whole investment in business has been 200 rupees, which I put in to buy a domain, and the $20 that I'd put in to buy a server. That's it. So if you calculate return on investment or ROC, all the traditional metrics you can throw out of the door because they don't make sense.
Right.
For us.
Because the denominator is so low that any amount of numerator is close to infinity.
So it's the power of ideas. In software, you do like a git commit, you open up your IDE and literally you can change the world.
Is that still possible?
It's still possible. I mean, the whole Bitcoin was an idea, right? And the first version of the software changed the world. So I think people have to believe that we live in an age where capital is actually a commodity and it's just overflowing. The world is overflowing with capital. What's constrained is initiative and the idea.
Say more to that effect, because it would not seem that way, na? Like, my point is,
See, are you the kind of person who can obsess over things and try to tweak it every single day for 10 years, for example? What the world lacks is this, not capital. If
so you're saying 10-year-long obsession.
Yeah. I literally started obsessing about startups when I was a teenager, 12, 13, when I got a computer, and I started Wingify when I was 21, 22. So that's how long it will take, multiple iterations of perseverance, trying to tweak, trying to learn, If you're that kind of a person, then that is a rarity. And that's how you create value and not just throwing, capital at the problem. If capital was a constraint, all the big companies would be innovating like crazy. But big companies struggle with that because what's constrained is the entrepreneurial energy of just iterating for a decade. And most people just give up.
Very interesting. You were mentioning you were reading something from Paul Graham. I'm assuming back in the day you probably read Hackers and Painters or something else.
Yeah,
his
I was reading Founders at Work
Okay.
By Jessica Livingston, and his blogs. Like I love his perspective on, let's say, what is wealth, how does it differ from money. And he wrote about what is growth, why it's necessary, what's the difference between startup and a small company. So he explains things from a very philosophical and first principles basis, and that appealed to me quite a bit.
I don't know how I bumped across Hackers and Painters. I think I was reading his blogs enough. And he has a very interesting style of writing, no doubt, right? Like, it's like 4 paragraphs in a blog post, but very solid. Like, you'll take it home. It's not something you'd forget very easily.
A lot of clarity.
The grammar also does not seem contaminated by the way the internet writes. After a certain
He optimizes for people. He optimizes for clarity and understanding. And that, by definition, means you will not use jargon.
Right. Can you actually pull up a picture, Manjot? Hackers and Painters. And I listened to it.
Hackers and Painters.
I think the first half of the book is for general sort of people, and the second half or the 4th, 5th chapter onwards, it starts getting into software too much, which is not my domain. But the first 3, 4 chapters are remembering even about how the modern schooling system evolved so that parents could go to factories and leave their kids someplace safe.
Yeah.
And that just changed, it changed everything about how I thought about schooling. And you have to sit and ask, why don't I homeschool my kid in that case? Like, what is modern privilege if not the accessibility to both money and time with family?
Yeah.
Right? Like, is there a transcendent place where work life is not balanced but integrated?
Yeah.
Right? And I mean, I was just thinking of these questions walking around also New York. Like, you can't ask these questions in Faridabad. The geography doesn't fit. Speaking of, I think he has a very interesting essay on the personality of cities. Have you ever come across that?
No, I have not.
Actually, pull this up. The Character of Cities or Personality of Cities by Paul Graham. And he talks about how LA has a certain character, San Francisco has a certain character, Miami has a certain character, and how that influences the economics of these places.
It's all the network effects, right? You attract people, they attract similar people. This is why, companies also cultures become almost like cult. Like Google has a very distinct culture versus Apple. It becomes a reflection of early team and founders because they just instinctively attract very similar kinds of people.
I think I also came across you writing about this on your Twitter sometime.
Yeah.
That your team, your company should feel like a cult.
Yeah.
It's very interesting advice.
I think it should. So here's the thing about diversity. I think in startups, diversity of experiences is very, very important. Everyone should bring in a different data point about the world because that's how you expand your world model. But diversity of values is very, very counterproductive because you'll be constantly debating them. It's not a democracy. So, for example, if democracy of values means some people say, hey, I want growth. Others says, I want profitability. Others say, hey, we should have more environment sustainability. If that's the case, you'll constantly be debating about what to do and the startup will not go anywhere. So instead of the first team, at least, let's say 3, 4, 5 people should be believing in the same value system so that you're able to move very fast, but they need to be bringing enough diverse experience around it. So people confuse when they say diversity. what's important is to ask what kind of diversity you want, and not necessarily diversity of all kinds.
Interesting. Guys, if you're enjoying the clips that we are putting out on this channel, you can consume all our podcasts in small clips right here. We chunk them together and release them just for your convenience. Do not forget to press the subscribe button.